Buying real estate subject to is something that I've been doing for a really long time. And in today's video, I'm going to go through every step that you need in order to be able to purchase money subject to all existing mortgages, loans, and liens against a property. This is ideal if you want to acquire a property with little to no money down, or if you want to buy a distressed property that's getting close to foreclosure. Also, too, this gives you an opportunity if you're a seller to sell a property without having to do anything to it. I'm sure you've seen a ton of those offers out there that are buy this home cash tomorrow, let us buy it with no fees, no closing costs. They're doing this typically using subject to purchase agreements. I created my own one-page subject to purchase agreement back in 2004. I'll share that with you too at the end of this video as a special added bonus. We're going to go through all of the tips and tricks that you need in order to start buying any piece of real estate subject to. Before we get started, I'm KP. I've been buying and selling real estate in San Diego since 1994. I got my real estate broker's license in 2003 and have been helping thousands of people buy and sell real estate throughout California. I've invested in thousands of properties across the United States. And if you've got anything real estate related, feel free to let me know. Now let's dive right in. Diving into this blog, I'll let you know that I did find 2 errors in there. So don't believe everything you read. This is one of the first ones. What is subject to in real estate investing? It's when you buy a property subject to the current mortgage, but that means that you're taking over the property. You're actually going to be the owner. You're going to be deeded that property, although the previous owner is still going to be financially responsible for the loan that is on the property. But what I wanted to bring your attention to is that it's not only a mortgage, it's any lien against that property. When you're taking a property subject to, the subject to clause means that you're taking it subject to every existing lien on that property. If it's a mortgage, if it's a personal lien, if it's a judgment, anything that's associated with that property, you're also you're going to have to figure out how you want to cure those title issues if you want to take it over subject to personal liens or other things like that. So why is this beneficial? Well, basically, the most common way this works is that for you as the investor, you agree to take over the mortgage payments. And again, any of those liens that are on the property, the lender is not informed of the transfer. So as long as you continue to do so and make payments on the property for all intents and purposes, you can fix it up, you can flip it, you can do whatever you want. The lender's none the wiser. They don't care where they're getting paid from as long as they're getting paid. What does the seller get? Well, in addition to getting their mortgage payments covered, which is usually that situation that they want to get out of, they can avoid doing a short sale, possibly if they're in foreclosure. The investor also typically pays them the difference between the current market value and their mortgage payment. Again, this is negotiable as well. So say you're taking over a property subject to all the existing liens. Those liens add up to be $500,000. The property's worth $600,000 as is in its current condition. They've got $100,000 in equity. You can negotiate that $100,000 if you want to pay it after the fact. If you want to pay less than that $600,000, say you only want to pay $20,000 or $30,000 out of that $100,000 of equity. Everything's negotiable with a subject to transfer. I've had people that'll just hand me the keys and say, take this property, I don't want it anymore. But again, that's all negotiable to your subject to purchase. So what's the difference between a subject to and a mortgage assumption? In a subject to, the previous owner is still liable for the mortgage like we spoke about. This means that if you, the investor, default on the mortgage payments, the lender can come after the previous owner for money, but they can't come after you. The flip side is the investor likely doesn't want to lose the property to the bank by quitting the mortgage payments. So there's a natural buy-in from both sides. If you acquire something, chances are you're invested into it. You don't want to lose it. You don't want to give it back because you've already spent that time and effort to purchase that property subject to. You're usually looking at how can I improve the value of it and sell it and make a profit. Whereas in a mortgage assumption, you're assuming all of that liability for the loan itself. So if you were to assume the mortgage and then own the property, if for some reason you're unable to make a payment, your credit gets damaged. Here's a great graphic right here. If the buyer assumes the mortgage, the new homeowner takes over the mortgage payments and sole liability for the debt. If the buyer buys it subject to the existing mortgage and liens, the new homeowner takes on the mortgage payments, but ultimate liability still rests with the original homeowner. So then that leads to the next paragraph, which is right here. You might be wondering why the seller would ever be willing to do a subject to deal instead of a mortgage assumption, since that places a lot of risk on their shoulders. There are various reasons. Sometimes the seller is underwater on their mortgage, which means they owe more to the bank than the property's worth. In this situation, if they try to do a mortgage assumption, the bank is going to require that they pay off the difference between what is owed and what the property is worth in cash. Obviously, this is not what the seller wants to do. In other cases, the seller might simply be in a hurry to avoid foreclosure or bankruptcy, and the subject to deals are so fast. We can do those in a day or two, whereas it's a long time to do a mortgage assumption. It could be 60, 90, 180 days to get an entire mortgage assumed, depending on who the bank is and what it is that you need to do with it. Whatever the reason is, it's important for investors to understand what the owner's desires are when it comes down to it, because you want to make sure that you're solving a problem. If the seller wants to get out from underneath the property for whatever reason and you can do it in a day or two, it's going to be much better for them than having to wait 60, 90, 180 days for them to be rid of their problem. There are three different types of subject to real estate deals, and the first one is cash to the loan subject to. This is usually the typical subject to transaction that I have done in the past. You're going to give the homeowner a little bit of money, the difference between what is owed on the property and what the property is currently worth in its current condition, and then they're going to walk away and deed you the property. They're usually in California going to give you a grant deed, and that's what you're going to file with the county recorder in order to own the property. Of course, you're not telling the lender that you are taking over payments. You're just going to continue to make those payments as is. To give you an idea also too, a quick tip about what lenders are thinking. Almost all mortgages have a due on sale clause, which means that they can call the loan due if there's a transfer of ownership. Have I ever seen any time that this has happened in the last 30 years? Absolutely not. They've never called the loan due. As long as lenders get paid, that's all they really care about. There's nobody there that's going to say, oh my gosh, this transfer took place and I want to get all my funds paid off. Doesn't mean they couldn't. That isn't a legal option for them. But if they're getting paid and they're getting their interest payments and they're getting their principal payments, chances are you're all good to go. The second type of subject to transaction is with the seller carryback. This is a great option if you don't have any money. You just want the seller to carry back whatever that difference is between what's owed and what the property's worth. So say it's worth, again, $500 and there is $400,000 worth of loans against the property. You can give them a seller carryback, a loan, a second or third loan for $100,000 that you pay off when you sell the property. So you're acquiring it for zero money down and just giving them a note or a promissory note trust deed that says, I'm going to pay you as soon as I sell the property or at some point in the future. Great deal, again, for the seller to get out of a property quickly, to get some of their equity, if not all their equity out of it, and for you to acquire a property with very little money. And the last type of subject to, which I've never done but is also an option, is the least common subject to real estate agreement, a wraparound deal. The interest rate on the loan is calculated using the original mortgage loan, but then an extra premium on top. So you're basically wrapping a loan around the current existing loan. Say that payment is at 4% and the owner wants to walk away with a little extra money. They might wrap it at 6%, so they're getting that 2% difference. This is, again, something that I've never done, but it is an option as well if you want to purchase the property. I would think that buying it with the seller carryback would be a much better option, but you can always do these wraparounds as well. Now we'll go through some of the benefits for buyers and sellers on subject to deals. The benefits for buyers and investors, as we already talked about, are you're going to typically get a steep discount on the actual purchase of the property. You might be getting it for hundreds of thousands of dollars less than you typically would have, because the seller wants to get out from underneath it for whatever reason. They're either behind on payments, it's coming close to foreclosure, they're too close as far as that margin goes, they owe more than the property's worth. Whatever the case may be, they want to get out from underneath it. You also, too, might be able to take over low interest rate mortgages. That's a great deal about subject tos. So we talked about this in one of my previous videos as well about loan assumptions, but you're going to also, too, want to take a look at subject to deals, because you can get into a mortgage that's at 3% if prevailing interest rates are 6%. Great way to take over a mortgage subject to. You're going to obviously be able to get that property for little or none of your own money down. You can usually wrap the property if you need to with seller financing on the back with a second or third, like we already spoke about. And then you can close extremely quickly. I've closed subject to deals in as little as, I think, 2 to 3 days. It's just basically a grant deed that you're recording. You can go through escrow. You can get title insurance if you'd like to, but you don't need to do any of this. I recommend that you at least get title checked because you don't know what liens are against that property. And you're going to want to know what exactly is owed to the penny before you end up closing on this subject to, because you don't want to waste your time if there's additional liens that didn't show up there on an initial tax report or whatever you're using to make your ultimate decision. Get a quick preliminary title report. It'll only take you a day, and then you'll be able to know exactly what liens are on that property, at least as of that preliminary. There might be some that aren't shown there, but you'll give you a pretty good idea. If you want to go through the entire escrow and closing process, that could take a week or two. As you know, real estate moves slowly, but if you want to close with just a grant deed, they can sign that over to you, get it notarized, and you can record it that same day. So what are the benefits for sellers? They're going to avoid that foreclosure or their bankruptcy if they're stuck with a property that they can't make a payment on. That's the biggest one. When I have people who call me and say, I can't make a payment, or I'm in foreclosure and my property is going to get sold at trustee sale in the next week, what can you do for me? Well, being able to help them out and get them out of that foreclosure, make those back payments for them, and then close on that property subject to is a huge deal for that seller. If they want to get rid of the property quickly, subject twos, like I said, can just be a couple of days. When it get paid up front, if they want to get some of their equity out of the property and they want to sell it quickly, say they have $100,000 or $200,000 worth of equity in that property, but they're willing to take $20,000 or $30,000. Wow, great. They'll get their money up front really quick rather than having to wait for it, having to pay all those real estate fees, everything else associated with it. No repairs and renovations. That's a big deal as well. The property's as is. So you're getting it with every problem that there is associated with the property, and the sellers know how many repairs and renovations are typically required. So unless you're getting a full property inspection, which I highly recommend as well, or having a licensed contractor walk through it just to see if there are any glaring issues that you're missing, make sure that you take a look at that property and know exactly what those repairs and renovations are going to cost before closing on a subject to transaction. So what are the risks associated with subject to deals? There are risks for both parties. The biggest one that most people talk about is this due on sale clause. Again, I've never had a loan called ever in the past, but this is something that is typically written into every single mortgage that's out there. As long as those loan companies continue to get paid that monthly payment, they really don't ask questions about it. At least that's what I've seen. I've paid on subject to properties for years. I'd say the longest one I probably did was about 7 years when I had a property that I closed subject to the existing loans, continued to make those payments on them until I improved them, got them to a point where I could sell them. I could flip them into another property. So those due on sale clauses are not that big of a deal, but it is something that you want to be aware of. The risk for sellers, obviously, is the loss of their home. This is the hardest one to overcome. They're losing their home basically, and they've got to figure out where they're going to go and what they're going to do. That's a big one. So it could be a matter of weeks, if not months, that a seller needs in order to figure out, oh, where am I going to move to? If they've got a place to move to immediately, not such a big deal. Lower credit score, I find that this isn't a big deal once you've missed a couple of payments or you're behind or there's nothing that you can do when it comes down to it. Your credit score is what it is. Typically, someone who's selling their home subject to is not too concerned with their credit score. If they were, they'd put their home on the market, they'd sell it traditionally, they'd be done with it. The liability for their current mortgage, again, not such a big deal. The most of the sellers that I've met that have had subject to deals that we've had completed, the liability is the least of their concerns. They want to be out from underneath their property. They don't care what happens to it. They just want to be done. So how do we mitigate those risks? Well, buyers should definitely get everything in writing. Make sure that you do. You also too have to have that exchange of value. So there has to be some consideration in every single contract, even if you get it in writing. Until you've got something for consideration to that seller, you have a voidable contract. So make sure that you get in writing and do have some consideration to them. Everything goes to escrow, or you have some way of transferring some of that upfront payment or some type of a promissory note to that seller so that you do have a enforceable contract. Get insurance. Make sure that you have insurance on the property. You don't want to have something go wrong. You don't want to be liable. You don't want to have it burned down on you. That would really suck. Make sure you do your due diligence, as we talked about. Get that home inspection done. Get that title report. Make sure that you know everything about the property before you close. And then research. Make sure that you know the state laws, make sure that you understand what's going on so that you don't violate anything, so that you don't put yourself in jeopardy, just in case there's something that goes on. Again, I'm only licensed in California. I know California state laws, but there may be laws in other states that are either prohibit or don't allow some type of subject to real estate transaction. Sellers should definitely work with a trustworthy investor. Many times investors will tie up a property. They'll have no way or no know-how to close the property, but they'll wholesale it or they'll take it to somebody else. This happens all the time. Many wholesalers just tie up properties for months and months and months and give the seller no benefit whatsoever. And then make sure that you get everything in writing. You always want to have a solid contract. You want to have money in escrow. You want to know exactly what the terms are, when that person's going to close, how you get out of the contract, everything there is that you should know about it. And if they're doing anything for you, you want to get those things in writing as well. So if there's going to be a second loan, a seller carryback, something like that, make sure that you have that in writing. It's signed, it's notarized, everything's good. The last part about here goes into finding subject to real estate deals. Again, most of the time sellers are going to reach out to investors. There's also been a ton of different types of online resources that have opened up over the last 10 years or so, from, your Open Doors to your, offer pads to tons of other real estate buying services. Zillow had one for a while, Realtor.com, Redfin. I think all of the large real estate portals did, and they got a lot of people that said, I just want to sell my home. I don't want it anymore. Again, we find those all the time. You might be driving through a neighborhood and see a home that's run down, and you're like, oh, I wonder what's going on with that home. Door knocking is usually the easiest way. Knock on a door, or if you see a vacant property, skip trace that owner, figure out who lives there. Do they want a subject to offer? Great, send it over to them. On to the special bonus section, subject to real estate contract. Again, I created my own back in 2004, used it thousands of times. We used to fax these to every expired listing in San Diego County, and we get a lot of times when people would say, absolutely not, I don't want to sell my home subject to, but we got several that did. Said, I just want to get rid of my house. How can I do that? Took them through the entire transaction, got the home closed, and took care of it all for them. I'll leave this down in the description down below so that if you do want a copy of the one-page real estate purchase agreement, you'll be able to get that. You can download it. You can do whatever you want. Make sure, again, that you have smashed that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So what are some of the final thoughts on subject to for real estate investors? Well, I've written hundreds, if not thousands of these in the past. We used to send them out to every single expired listing in San Diego County. We got a lot of no's, but we did get a few yeses from them as well. If you're buying or investing anywhere, use a subject to purchase agreement. It's not going to hurt. If you need to do a traditional financed real estate transaction or a cash purchase, you can always do that, but start off subject to. You don't know what the seller is going to accept. On the other end of these things, if you are selling a property and there's no reason for you to sell quickly, if you've got equity in your property and you're current on your payments, there's no reason to do subject to transaction. You can do lots of other creative ways if you want to sell that property quickly. Assumable mortgages obviously are a big benefit, but you can sell it with a wrap. You can sell it with a second seller carryback. You can do lots of things as well. Remember, if there's any real estate you need anywhere in California, feel free to let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.